Podcast. I'm very pleased to have with us Joel Sallow. Welcome to the show. So, where are you from,
Thanks.
Joel?
Australia, originally.
Oh, okay.
Currently, I'm living in Florida.
Oh, okay. And what's some of your IT background? What got you interested in PowerShell?
Honestly, just necessity, really. I took a low-level help desk job when I came out here from Australia, and it was a nightmare trying to do everything every time. So I don't really remember how I stumbled upon it, but eventually I stumbled onto the PowerShell subreddit, and then I was just like, I guess should just like automate everything, because it would get ridiculous otherwise doing all these setups and like teardowns and everything of like all our systems, because that happened regularly, because there are a lot of really old machines, so there was a lot of stuff getting torn out and more stuff getting put in, so it was a nightmare otherwise, basically. I guess you could say I learned because I had to.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then after a while, I was like, oh, this is actually like really interesting. And then I got into sort of the deeper parts of it, just sort of hanging around like the Slack and the Discord and the PowerShell core repo and stuff like that. So got a bit more interested in that side of things as well.
So were you doing help desk for a small company or a big company? Because it sounded
Small
like you
company,
were doing
yeah.
more than just taking calls and then handing them off to, some higher level engineer.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, so it's a fairly small company, but they have basically zero IT staff other than me. So
Oh, okay.
I was doing everything.
That's how I started out too. I think that's probably one of the better ways to get started.
Not bad for sure.
It's all you, so you better figure it out one way or another.
Yeah, you basically got us. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you have gotten fairly deep in the PowerShell community, and how long have you been involved?
What are we now? We're now March, so 18 months-ish, give or take.
Okay, yeah. From my perspective, that's not a lot of time.
No, it's really not. Time gets ahead of us very quickly.
And then, did you have like a developer background? Had you done any code before PowerShell, or was PowerShell your first language?
So I'd done some. I did like a semester or so of sort of like basic C# stuff. I didn't really get too deep into it there. It was the most dry course on the planet. It was very boring. But I guess before that, growing up, I'd like meddled around with like Quick Basic and stuff, even though it was years out of date by that point anyway. But it was like, it was like a nice and simple thing. I kind of like got the ideas through that, like the general concepts, and then I didn't really do too much for a good handful of years. I spent actually quite a lot of time on like websites like Tumblr when I was in my teens, and I learned a lot of like HTML, CSS there, which helps like a little, but it's still like a very different sort of framework to work with. The JavaScript stuff helped a bit more, and then at some point I stumbled onto the F# commands, and I gave them a shot, and I went through like the whole thing. So that's probably like the closest I came back to programming for a while. But I didn't really have anything that I wanted to use it for, so I forgot most of that. And then when I came here to America, it was almost like starting again, except like I guess that I had a pretty decent general knowledge of like sort of I guess object-oriented programming concepts, so it was a little easier to pick up than I guess it might be for some people.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I remember when I first got started in PowerShell, it took me a while to wrap my concept around the whole object concept. But, for most people, if they have, some sort of background, they've probably done some sort of object-oriented language already. So it makes more sense that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned F# cones. So what is that? Because it's going to lead into
Yeah, so that was something I stumbled onto, I don't know, what was it, like 16, 17? I can't remember how old I was, but basically it was someone had put together this this little repository full of F# scripts that were just kind of like designed to be broken, and then it would sort of like walk you through like why it was broken, how you would fix it, and then like it would basically just step from the very simple stuff on through some more complicated things, and then eventually once in a while it'd just give you like a full on like puzzle to solve essentially, and that was quite fun to work with. F# is a very what's the word? Pedantic language. It's like Python in which it's like sensitive to white space, but its general syntax is very sort of like there's really only one or two ways to do things. If you want any more, like you have to basically change your entire approach. So it's a very I guess I would call it like a prescriptive language. It's the designer of F# was like, this is how you code this, and that's kind of like it. Like there's no real arguing with it. Like it just won't compile. So it was a fun language, but it was also a very frustrating language. And but yeah, so it was basically just a way of learning F#,
okay,
where it just went from instead of just learning concepts and reading documentation, it was a little more hands-on. It would compile bits and pieces as you go, and let you keep track of your progress and just turn the whole thing into basically a game, which was always fun. So.
And then did you end up using F#, or did you just have some fun learning it?
I just had some fun learning it. I didn't really use it for anything at that point. I actually attempted to code a commandlet in it recently, which mixed success. Like it works as a commandlet, but it isn't 100% functional. There was so much that I had to change that it doesn't quite work the same anymore. So
okay,
that's a side project for another day. I'm not gonna get too far into that at the moment because currently it's working and I don't want to break it yet.
So, but that gave you an idea to do the same thing for PowerShell. So you want to talk about that project?
Yeah, sure. So I think I was roughly 8 to 10 months in from just like starting to learn PowerShell, and I was getting pretty comfortable with like the basics, I guess. And I don't remember exactly where, but it was probably in the back of my mind from a handful of years back or whatever. And I was like, oh, that was that old project like way back there. I wonder if that's still around. It's still actually pretty current, still being updated here and there. So I was like, oh, this thing's still here. And I don't think I actually ran through it again at that point, but I was like, oh, this is a great idea. I should see if I can do a similar thing with PowerShell, because so for literally the first 3 months of learning PowerShell, I was basically just lurking on the PowerShell subreddit. Okay. Didn't really post a lot. Would post here and there if I thought I knew the answer to whatever question someone had or whatnot. But a lot of the time I didn't. So I would just read everyone else's responses and just sort of tinker with it and see what I could do. And then after the first couple of months, I got a little more confident. I was like, okay, this isn't that tricky after a bit. I kind of got an idea of how the pieces went together. And I just basically started I would spend an hour or two or whatever every day, every other day on the subreddit. Just I would flick through and look for some question that either hadn't been answered or hasn't had a lot of answers. And I would go through and then see if I could solve it. And then I would look through other people's answers, see if there was anything I could use in those to make my answer better, and just kind of go through the whole process. But what I noticed was there's PowerShell is a bit of an unusual language in that a lot of the community is focused around helping new people learn PowerShell, which is, I think, pretty unusual. A lot of the time that I've seen, at least, there isn't as much of that with a lot of other more established languages. Okay. It's always go read this book, or here's the documentation, figure it out. It's not okay, this is how this works, break it down. But a lot of the people who know PowerShell are oh, okay, so this is why this works, this is how this works, this is how you put it together. They're much more willing to kind of break it down and explain it for you and just help you along a bit more. so I was like, oh, I should like see if I could do something like the F sharp koans, but in PowerShell. And I think initially I basically like I stumbled across the F sharp koans again, and I was on the PowerShell Slack at that point, I think. And I was like, hey guys, look at this thing that I found. And then someone was like, hey, this would be cool for PowerShell. I'm like, oh yeah, that actually really would. I don't remember who it was, unfortunately, but and then basically I just like spent like another 4 hours like tinkering around with it, like figuring out how I could make it work. And I think at that point I hadn't really learned a lot of Pester, and I was like, but like Pester would be great for this, so I guess I'm learning it as I go effectively. So I would, like pull up the Pester documentation and like start hacking together like the first bits of a lesson, I guess.
So what were your?
That's kind of where that goes.
Was the subreddit your main source of PowerShell knowledge when you were getting started, or did you read any books or watch videos or go to class or anything?
No, not really.
Okay.
It was mainly the subreddit and whatever documentation I could find online. Like I didn't really go after any particular books. Like there were books recommended, and I just never really went for them. I'm not really sure why. I guess in a lot of ways, when I have tried to learn languages in the past, like F sharp and like the other ones, I did like poke into a few books, and it was very hard for me to bridge the gap between this is what it is on paper and this is how it actually like works.
Okay.
There's just a disconnect there that's a little bit tricky to sort of put into words that just didn't really jive well with how I like to learn. Like I like to be able to like copy and paste something and then see exactly how it works like right there. Otherwise it's like it just doesn't really connect up properly in my head, I guess. I don't know.
So you learn more by playing with the language.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what was the methodology behind how you structured PS cones? So koans? Is that how you said it?
Koans, I guess.
Koans?
I'm not going to pretend I know the exact pronunciation. It's a Middle Eastern word, I think. Eastern, somewhere in there. Tibetan, I think, maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, I forget, but yeah, I don't know.
So do you want? Do you kind of want to go over the purpose of it? Because I don't think we were explicit about what it actually is, what its purpose is, and then we can start talking about, why people would want to go through this and kind of the value that they're going to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, it went through a few iterations, I guess, but basically it's designed to create an environment for learning PowerShell where you can always basically self-check yourself, and you can essentially get the answers if you want, but it gives you the framework to play with it and mess around with it and extend on the existing lessons in ways that you can just self-check it to oblivion and go as deep as you want, and it will tell you exactly what you want to know, because that's how Pester is. Like if you, for example, just insert a random new assertion, it'll go ahead and run that because it doesn't discriminate. It'll just be like, oh, okay, you want to know this extra thing? Sure. And then you can just build your own assertions and see why they fail. Basically, it's set up with a basic framework, but there are gaps left in places, some of them deliberately, some of them less so, but for the most part, it works pretty smoothly. And wherever there's a gap, you can either just kind of bypass it if you already kind of know the concept. But if you don't, you can just kind of explore around it, add a couple extra assertions in just to test like what you think is happening, and it will tell you basically straight away whether or not you're right. Like there's no PowerShell is great in that there's no like real compile time. You just run a command and it's like, this is exactly what happened, effectively. So although you can compile stuff with PowerShell, and I've been tinkering with that lately, but the script side of the language is really effective for learning because it just gives you basically instant feedback if you know what you're looking for. And the Pester framework allows it to give a very what's the word? Scripted almost pun. Scripted sort of response framework, but that you can extend on to add in any bits that you're not quite getting. Like if there's a specific I can't think of a specific example, but if there's like if it's trying to teach you this one thing and there's a missing step there that you're not getting, you can effectively like just chop out this last little step here that it took, make that assertion, check what it is, and then go, okay, this is why this isn't working, and then go on to the next part. So it basically lets you teach yourself, but in a sufficiently guided way that that it's a lot less frustrating and banging your head against the wall trying to find this one obscure piece of documentation. Like, it just kind of lays it all out there.
So just to give people a picture, if they haven't used it before, so what you do is you go to the site, which will be in the show notes, but you can just search for PS Coans or Coans, Koans, and you'll find the project on GitHub. And then the instructions are on the page. You just scroll down. You can install it from the PowerShell gallery. And then there's a command that you run, right? Measure karma. And then what it does is it starts running pester tests. And the tests are designed to fail. And then it'll tell you, which file you need to open to look at that test. You can see the assertion. And there's some comments in the code itself that are going to teach you the different concepts that are covered. And from what I have seen, I've gone through like the first 100. I forget how many there are. They're like 400 or something like that. And I only had time to do the first 100. But it's very systematic. It's a very granular approach to the concepts that are covered. And in some cases, they're hitting nice little nuances that you may not get, if you're just reading the documentation, actually seeing how it works. And we've talked about Pester before. It's been a while, but Pester is a testing framework for PowerShell. And one of the things that you don't necessarily need to know Pester to use this, but it would help you to learn Pester and kind of get a feel for how Pester works. But essentially, it has little puzzles that you solve in the Pester code itself, in the assertion. So, it may have a couple of underspaces and, pipe to should be, true. And you have to figure out what to put in the blank, essentially, in order to make the test pass. And then when that test passed, you go to the next assertion or the next section if you're doing multiple at a time. But it kind of leads you through the process. You just keep running the measure karma command, and it tells you, okay, here's the next failure. Here's where it is in the code. Make this work. And I think this is a very clever way to teach PowerShell, and probably a very effective way to learn PowerShell. I'm going through it. I've had a lot of opportunities recently to do a lot of PowerShell mentoring because of the orchestration tool that we're using, an orchestration tool called PMG, which is very powerful. And a lot of the stuff that you can do, its PowerShell support is extremely good. So if you know PowerShell, you can do, you have like a superpower with this tool. So people are coming to me more and more often that are using PMG because they want to learn more PowerShell. And I think this is going to be one of the places that I send them to help them learn the concepts in a systematic, interactive way where it's hands-on keyboard. You're not just watching a video or reading a book. It's very much I had a teacher once who said memory's in the hands. And this is that style of learning. And it's little bite-sized pieces that you're going through. So that's an approach that I find kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it's I've spoken to a few people about it, and generally the response has been pretty good. So hoping that it's one of those things where like if there were more problems with it, people would be kind of like speaking up about it. But it's like it's good to like, okay, this is great. But a lot of the time, I don't get a great deal of feedback, so any more is always good. But yeah, like you said, like it's just little bite-sized pieces, and I've got them divided up by like file in terms of like the subject matter. I think for about a dozen or so of them. I've got them following the actual PowerShell about help topics.
Oh, okay.
Which are you can find online, or they're actually in PowerShell. If you type get help about asterisk, it'll bring a whole bunch of those up. And I don't cover literally every one of them. I probably will eventually, but for now, there's like the basic subset. You've got like basic types you work with, and stuff like that, and then little PowerShell nuances that get added on, as you mentioned. So, yeah.
So how far does this go down the PowerShell learning path? I mean, would you say once you get through all, I forget, is it 400? I don't remember exactly. How far along your PowerShell journey do you think that's going to get you?
That'll get you past the initial hurdles, and it won't get you obviously the whole way. There are a lot of stuff that it doesn't cover. It doesn't really cover at the moment any specific modules. I have one of the guys on the PowerShell Slack, Shane, is actually working on a specific set of koans for the DBA tools module.
Oh yeah, I saw something about that.
Which would be pretty awesome once that gets done. I'd love to do some for the Active Directory module.
Oh yeah.
I just haven't really had time yet, but that's definitely one that I'd love to do. Probably end up doing a lot of mocking for commands there, but it can be made to work even if you don't really have an actual Active Directory server, which is probably a good thing. And then maybe we'll have like a live section or something. I'm not sure, but yeah, so like it doesn't cover any specific non-core PowerShell modules as yet. That's for the future.
Okay.
But it'll cover all your basic types. It'll cover how to write a basic and an advanced function, how arguments tend to be handled for those functions. It does cover quite a bit. It covers some of the deeper .NET types that tend to end up being used in PowerShell or should be used and aren't. Quick example, a lot of scripts written from, say, version 2 through version 4 or so of PowerShell that are still readily available online either often use the adding extra items to a static array trick, which is fine, but doesn't work very well for large collections because it's slow. It has to rebuild everything. And then the other half of them will use ArrayList, which is actually, I think, classified as a somewhat deprecated class. So I have a lesson in there where it mentions all that and it explains all that, and then it goes on to bring up the generic list, which I think is generally a much more effective tool for when you want that kind of dynamic sort of resizable collection. But is still kind of underused in PowerShell, I think. It isn't always necessary, but when it is, yeah. So there's things like that get covered. Obviously, cover hash tables and like basically anything you can do in basic syntax in PowerShell is pretty much covered at the moment. And then I've got a whole bunch of branches and rabbit holes I can run down and add a bunch more onto at a later date. But yeah.
So you must have spent a tremendous number of hours writing all those assertions.
I mean, I can knock out a basic framework for one of those files. Like the first dozen files maybe took a couple hours max.
Cool.
Like a single lesson file, I can knock it out, knock the basics out in like a half hour, spend maybe another like 10 or so minutes adding like little bits and comments and pointing out nuances and stuff like that. And like certainly there are stuff that I don't get perfect the first time around. Like I usually have to do an extra pass or two, just to skim through, make sure I didn't like mess up any syntax or whatever. But the basics don't take too long to hammer out. But like obviously it's the time investment isn't getting smaller. So
yeah, that's excellent work. I'm very happy to see this kind of thing. I think it's very clever, a very clever way to learn. And you're also, it's a GitHub project. So if people want to help you out and add to it, what's the best way to do that?
Just either so if you notice an issue, if like you notice there's like a problem with like one of the files, it's not functioning correctly, whatever, just go ahead and drop an issue on the GitHub. I keep a pretty good eye on those. If you drop an issue or a pull request or whatever, I'll usually see that within a couple hours at most, usually. And I'll respond to basically all those. A few people have submitted pull requests, and I'll like go through and make sure it's all good, and then merge it in. So if you want to like contribute some lessons, go for it, go wild. I'll give you some tips on sort of like following the format a bit, so it doesn't end up being like with like 6 or 7 different code styles in like the one lesson, because that'll just get ridiculous and very confusing.
Sure. Yeah.
It's meant to be approachable, so I kind of try and keep it as consistent as possible, because that way there's less craziness going on when it's not relevant to the lesson. So, but yeah, like anyone who wants to contribute, absolutely welcome. Just rock on up. And if you need ideas of stuff what to contribute, just pop an issue in. I have so many. But or just come drop by on the PowerShell Slack or Discord, whatever you want to do, because I'm usually around there here and there. So yeah.
And does it matter what channel in Slack?
No, if you mention me, I'll usually see it. I think Slack is a bit different than Discord, where it segregates the channels a little more. But I think if you add someone in a channel they're not technically like a member of, but if it's still in the same like workspace, I think it gives you the option to like notify them. So yeah, just notify me and I'll
so it kind of adds you into that channel if that happens, or they have the ability to invite you.
Yeah, Discord just like you're in every channel, deal with it. So yeah.
Yeah, I haven't had. I installed Discord and I looked at the UI and I'm like, ugh. And then I went back to Slack because that's what I'm used to.
No, fair enough. Slack is, I mean, like the UI to me isn't that different. There's a couple like different points here and there, but for the most part, it's similar enough. I can just kind of flick back and forth between them as I need to. Usually, I'll be mainly in Discord though. So
yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think this is a fantastic contribution you've made to the PowerShell community, and I think that it's going to grow, and I think that people are going to find it very useful in learning. So I'm looking forward to finishing it out, and so I can say, hey,
well, see, I'm just
add it to the list of things that I already recommend. But yeah, nice. you will be making more work for yourself for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's already some extra stuff in PowerShell core. I'm gonna have to like split off into like separate files and explain properly. But yeah, I'll get there.
So Glenn wants to know if you would consider a gherkin section of PS Cohen's.
I won't say I'm against it, because that would be a bad idea. So Gherkin is Pester supports Gherkin style syntax. For anyone who doesn't know, it's basically just a different format of making the assertions. It does let you do some slightly more interesting and versatile testing. I don't like it much.
Okay.
What I've found is at least for small projects, it tends to end up with roughly 1.5 to twice the number of files you need to test anything, because it splits out like the actual code sections and then like the descriptive like format sections, which is fine. But also I found that it just tends to be a lot more work to set up and maintain. You end up having to, like, any new tests, you have to review 2 extra files rather than 1, and you end up having to basically review files more or less side by side, because you have this layout file which is like this should do this code should do this, but the code is actually in like a different file.
Okay.
Which, I mean, fine, but it's not how I like to work. Like, it just ends up splitting the focus too much for me personally. I can definitely appreciate it's probably a very effective framework to go with if you have like a dozen plus people working on like a single project, because it forces an extra formality in your testing syntax and in the language you have to use when describing your tests, which is great for standardizing something across like a large number of people. But for any smaller projects, it seems like it's just really heavily overkill. So Gherkin is great, I'm sure, but I don't personally like to use it.
Okay.
It's not very approachable, is what I found. So like if I were to include a Gherkin section, it would probably end up being a single file more or less, and we would probably end up doing half the testing in the regular pester syntax anyway, just to try and explain it, which is fine, and it's probably worth doing. But I don't know enough about Gherkin to do it, and Gherkin is not my strong suit. If Joel Bennett wants to do it, because I know he loves Gherkin, he is more than welcome to. I will happily include it.
Yeah, Joel and Glenn can knock that out.
Yeah,
just
if you guys
rewrite
want
it.
to do it,
Rewrite it with
wild. I will
Gherkin.
happily accept that PR, but
Or rewrite it with Gherkin, and then we'll have a pester version and a Gherkin version.
Well, Gherkin is pester when it's written in PowerShell anyway. But yeah, I mean, maybe it might be worth having, like, I guess, like, you know, the Gherkin and pester versions. That might even be a more effective way of teaching the Gherkin syntax, because because once you've run through it one way, you can just sort of map what you already have and be like, okay, this is just how it's done here. So maybe I'm not really sure. It would probably need a bit of experimentation just to see how it goes.
Okay, sure. That makes sense. But that is not the only project you are known for. Tell us about PS Word Cloud.
Okay, that one started. I don't even know why that one started. Basically, I think. What I don't even know. I think once again I can basically point back to someone on the PowerShell Slack or Discord who made some offhand comment, and I was like, "That's an interesting idea. Let me check that out." So the all of the versions from version 1.0 branch are completely in PowerShell, which is great, but it's a little slower. So essentially, when I first wrote it, I used the system drawing classes, which are great on Windows. Once you start to get to PowerShell core, and once you start to try and run them on Mac and Linux, the mono-based implementations of system drawing are a little terrible. Tyler, who works on VS Code, got interested, and he was trying to help me out with it, and he literally couldn't even get it to render anything. It was just crashing straight out. So I was basically forced to rewrite it all in C# in order to properly make use of a library I found. It's called Skia#. Basically, I'm gonna backtrack a minute. So basically, PS Word Cloud ended up being you get like a bunch of text, a big document, you know, a whole bunch of code source files, whatever you want to do, and you just pipe it all into this one commandlet, and it just generates an image. It does some math, you know, like how many times each word occurs, et cetera, and then basically the more often the word occurs, it just makes it bigger in the image, and then it scales it to fit to a certain canvas size and all that sort of stuff, and pretty colors and all sorts of extra, completely unnecessary, but like, oh, this is fun type features got added to it sooner or later. So someone was like, oh, what if we could do this? And I'm like, I guess I'm cutting that in. So there was a lot of stuff. Like initially it was just like it'll draw words in like this one font and stick them on an image somewhere, and that's it. And then someone was like, hey, but like, you know, like a lot of word clouds on the internet, like that are, you know, just like made manually or like made by other libraries, like, oh, they'll like rotate them here and there. I'm like, all right, I guess I'm adding some rotation, whatever. And for a while, so both the initial system drawing classes and the Skia# stuff that I've started using, they have like a built-in right vertical text thing, so I just kind of used that for a while, and then after a while I was like, yeah, what if we could just rotate whatever, and then I had to re-figure everything else out. But so yeah, it started off as like a hobby project, and then like people kept asking for stuff, and I just kept adding stuff in, and then I rewrote the whole thing twice. So first I rewrote it, and I was like, I should write this as a commandlet, so I got to compile it, and I should write this in F#. No. So as I mentioned before, F# is a very strict, very dictatorial language. It tells you how it wants your syntax to be, and you have to accept it or it refuses to compile. So it's very tricky to work with, and it also has a lot of functional programming elements. So it lacks in some areas. Like, for example, I ran into an issue where you literally cannot write a loop in F# that breaks early. It doesn't allow it. There is no break keyword in F#, and the for statement is literally just a function. So you can't break or like return early without returning from like your whole bunch of code. So if you want to write something that can return early, you have to write a recursive function. It's the only way to do it. Like that you have to rewrite your whole block and like figure out what your parameters have to be, and like it has to be recursive. Like there's no other way to do it. So I did successfully rewrite it. It's functional, but it's still a little glitchy. It doesn't quite work as well. But I was basically writing it in C# and F# at the same time. Like I was like, I know how to write C#. I know I can do it in this language. I'm going to try F# as well. And so I rewrote it twice. And then I had to convert everything that I was using from the built-in libraries to Skia#, which it was just like a whole other thing. I ended up getting to a point where there was a bug in the library that would just crash the entire process because it was accessing memory in a bad way, because Skia# is like built on things that have to do platform invoke and stuff like that, and it's very messy when it doesn't go well. But I've got it to a point where it's pretty stable, so I'm gonna probably tinker with it a bit here and there. But for the most part, it's pretty solid at the moment. But yeah, basically, it's just kind of like a fun little module that was a lot of fun to write and mess with, and people were like, "Oh, what if we could do this?" And I was like, "Cool, I'll see if I can add that too." There's still a couple of feature requests on the GitHub for things like, what if you could like take this image and like rotate it like 35 degrees in the Z direction? I'm like, I don't know enough matrix math for this. This is why do you want this? Basically, like, you know those you know how some code blogs will have like this like photoshopped image where it's just literally just like a wall of code that's like flipped a little bit in like Photoshop, and like they put like some green glow on it or whatever to make it look pretty. And he's like, but what if your module could just do this with like the word cloud? I'm like, that's a cool idea, but isn't that just like better for Photoshop, I guess? Like, I don't know, whatever. I probably will end up doing it eventually, but for the moment it's like I don't want to deal with that math right now. It's just too much.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the examples here, and it's really cool. It's gorgeous.
Thanks. I don't think I have it in the example in the repo, but I tweeted one out like yesterday or today or something that was like a really interesting example with like one of my favorite fonts to mess around with this one on. But yeah, no, it's like, it's really heavily dependent on the font and like the settings you choose, because there are a ton of settings that I put in because people kept asking for things. So now there's a ton of settings to play with and see what happens, I guess. But yeah, no, it's you can make some very interesting things. I know Kevin Marquette's actually been using it for thumbnail images for his blog posts, and I was like, cool, I guess. All right, whatever. But yeah, the only thing I should point out, if you've been using the version 1, that one always output PNG files, raster images. The 2.0 and above versions all output SVG vector files.
Oh, okay.
Which is partially just because I could. With Skia, it just supported it, and I was like, I mean, why not? Because you can, once you have the file, you can just resize it to whatever you want and just save it as whatever kind of image you want. Like, it's, maybe you need like an extra thing to do that, but most browsers can just display SVG as is anyway. So it's like, yeah. I figured it was a little easier just for web-based stuff, and then if you want to convert it to like an actual image, it's not too tricky to do either. Okay.
I'm gonna have to play with that one. That one I haven't played with yet.
That one's fun to mess with. Like literally, so one of the reasons I ended up rewriting it in C# was because I kept doing something really, really silly, which was basically I would take the entire PowerShell core repo, tell PowerShell to get me all the files, all the source code and all the PowerShell files, and give me all that text, and then send it to my commandlet. And because it was written in PowerShell, it was pretty slow. There's like 80,000 lines of text in those files. And so I got it, and so after a while, I was like, this is just ridiculous. I have to code this in something faster and put some threading on this because the text processing takes too long. So that's why it has threading on the text processing, because I kept trying to process the entire PowerShell core repo over and over, and that was taking like literally an hour just to process the text. And I was like, this is ridiculous. So first I threaded it in PowerShell, and then I was like, this still isn't fast enough. So I guess I'm going to compile this and put it in like async on like C# or whatever, and so I did that, and now I can process the entire PowerShell core repo in about 15 seconds before it starts like actually drawing stuff, which is pretty good. So, yeah, it was nice.
Yeah, I want to put one of my code directories through this and see what commandlets I use the most.
Fun. There is a couple things. If you ever run Pesta through it, by default, it excludes the word should because it's a very common English word. So if you want to actually show that one, you'll have to make sure you tell it to not ignore that one. But
okay,
there's a handful of words that are listed in the help, I think, that it ignores by default. But you can turn that off entirely, or just like pick out specific words you don't want it to ignore, and it'll happily let you do it.
So, are there any other projects you want the world to know about?
Nothing of my own, but I've been tinkering a lot with PowerShell core itself, and I have a handful of pull requests that some have been merged, some are still waiting, that have been fun to work with. I'll just quickly pull a couple up here because I have my own little list in GitHub. Because I don't remember, I literally don't remember them all, but
sure.
One of the ones that was literally taking forever to get sorted because I did way too much in one pull request. Basically, I was so I added in a bunch of extra type suffixes. So like in PowerShell, you can enter numbers and specify that they're 64-bit integers just by putting like an L suffix, like for like C# alias is long numeral. So you just put like 100L and then it's a different type of number. And so I was like, that's great, but we have like 8 other types of numbers. Why are we just doing one? And so I went in and tinkered around for like a month and figured it out and put that all together. And then it's sat there for like 3 months while they were reviewing it and like, hey, could you do this a bit better? And I was like, all right, whatever. So that's I think mostly in there. There's like 1 or 2 things that had to get split out, and I think basically all of it's there. Like you can there's syntax in there for entering byte type numbers. Basically everything from byte from signed byte through int64 is in there now, I think, more or less.
Oh wow.
Decimal was already in there. So yeah, you can do signed byte, your shorts, your unsigned shorts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're all there. I don't know if they finished the documentation for that yet, but I was like, I should probably put something in PS Commands for that because that's not documented anywhere yet. So, but yeah, so I did all that, and then who was it? I can't remember who it was, but someone was like, "Oh, why don't we have like binary input for PowerShell?" And I was like, "I don't know. Let me look." So I did, and so I had a lot of code that I had to like rework there because it was designed just to work with like either. I actually have like a whole thing that I like stream that I did with Shane, and I put it on YouTube or whatever, but. We went through the tokenizer, and I just like pointed out where basically PowerShell treated numbers, past tense because it is past tense now, but treated numbers as either you have decimal numbers, just like your regular everyday numbers, or you can prefix it with like 0x for hexadecimal numbers, which is great for like certain programming things. But some things just work better with being able to enter binary. Like PowerShell has binary operators like binary or and binary and all that sort of stuff. But they don't get a lot of use, partially because like it's just PowerShell is like a bit of a high level for that, but partially also because it's a real pain to figure out what the binary or of something is when it's in decimal or hex. It's just a lot more mental math or writing it out and figuring it out. So I was like, let's just put some binary syntax in here. Why the heck not? And you can go and get on the PowerShell core GitHub and like look at the pull requests I've done, and like there are quite a few, but there are several like where we just like spent like weeks and weeks just hashing out like, oh, how exactly should this work, et cetera, et cetera. So it was quite a bit. But all those types are in there now. There was one fix I did recently for it's a bit of an obscure one, but like when you're working with numbers, there's also like what's the word? Like multiplier suffixes. Like you can like write 1 gigabyte, and PowerShell knows exactly how many that is in like bytes. It'll just be like, this is this number.
Oh, right.
And it just treats it like a number. But if you actually have that in a string, like 1 GB in a string, and you try and do math with that, a lot of the time PowerShell will be like, what the heck are you doing? This isn't a number. Because those code paths just weren't like lined up, and so I put a fix in for that recently to make that a little more consistent and just easier to work with, because it turned out to be very difficult to get the actual number back out once you had that in that form in a string. It was just really silly and annoying, so I had to fix that up. But yeah, so there's a few things like that where I would like tidy some things up, or just like contribute some extra stuff there. So a lot of the stuff is just like I'll like find something that I don't like in PowerShell, or that I find frustrating, or that I'm like, I wish I could do this, and then I'll go like hunt down the source and like figure out where it happens, and like if I can make it work. And if I can't, usually basically my first protocol is Patrick is one of the guys on the PowerShell Discord, and he's usually pretty happy to answer any questions I have. Like a lot of when I first started tinkering with the different number types that I put in, I was like, where is anything? Like I didn't know my way around the repo at all. So he basically was like, okay, this is what you need to change here, figure it out. I'm like, that's a good enough start for me. And I just went and like broke it several times, and then reset it like a few times, and broke it a few more times, and then I figured it out. So there's a lot of stuff you can break, but it's just part of the fun, really. Because I was playing around literally in PowerShell's like language processor, the tokenizer they call it. There were several times where I would compile it, and it would just refuse to do anything because it didn't know. Like it would stop reading like the end of your input. Like you would press enter, and it's like, now what? Like it didn't know how to read your command and stuff like that. That was a few fun times where I was like, what the hell did I just break? But that was great.
So you'd recommend that anybody hop in and do that?
It's good fun, and like a lot of the I can't speak for like every repository out there, but the PowerShell folks, like they're very appreciative of like any contributions. Like seriously, like people will like contribute documentation stuff. Like if you want to start with like fixing typos and stuff, go for it. They'll be happy to like check it through and make sure it's good. But like for like stuff with like code, if you find an open issue and you're not sure where to start, literally just post in the issue, be like, hey, I want to try and work this out. Do you have like, does anyone know where to start? And usually either someone from the PowerShell team or me, if I happen to know, or if I know someone who happens to know, I will mention them on GitHub and like pull them in and be like, hey, where's a good place to start? And like there's a lot of people on there who are just happy to help out and be like, hey, this is where you can start. Here's some ideas I might have, like how you might do it. You might have to fiddle with it a bit, like just figure it out. But like this is where you'd start. And then if you have any issues, you just like submit a pull request, be like, hey, this is work in progress. This is what I'm stuck on. And then they'll come along and review it, be like, oh, this is what you need right here. So like a lot of them are very helpful. The PowerShell team are great. Like they'll just look through, be like, oh, you missed this, please fix. This is how you can do this better. Like they're very great with their feedback. And yeah, like every now and again you might run into something where they're like, we can't really change this because like it's been like this for like 10 years. And if we change this now, it'll be very confusing and it'll break a lot of things. So if we want to do this, we'll have to like put this in like an experimental feature flag or whatever, which they're starting to do, which is great. But some things do get rejected, not gonna lie. But the vast majority of things, sure, go for it. See what they say. Even if it does get rejected, you usually learn quite a bit. Just be like, oh, sure, whatever, and then move on to the next thing. Like it's basically every pull request I've seen on there is just them just like helping out and like helping people figure out. Some people on there like know their stuff and they're just like and they're tinkering around and then it's just back and forth like how should we implement this type stuff. But A lot of the other stuff is like people don't really know what they're doing, and then they'll come along and be like, "Hey, this is great. We missed a few things here. Can we like tidy this up, et cetera, and they'll just have whatever suggestions they have, and it's usually very helpful. When I was doing it, shout out to Ilya Isazanov on the PowerShell repo. He's one of the collaborators. I think he's one of the only ones who's actually registered as like as like an actual collaborator, and he actually has like write access to certain things. But he spends I don't know how many hours on there. When I submitted my first pull request there, that ended up getting closed and split off, and it was messy, so I had to redo it a couple times. But he literally went through from top to bottom and was like, "This needs fixing. This needs fixing. Can we do this a little better? What do you think about this? Why is this done this way? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." For like, and this was like a 3,000 line file, and I changed like a third of it, and he just went through top to bottom, was like, "Okay, this is how we can do this better, great." And I was like, "Wait, really?" And then like as we just sort of go through the conversations for each like little point that needed fixing or whatever, he would just like come back and be like, "Hey, this is what we need to do here. This is," and something that I probably should mention is some of the people will like say, "Hey, let's do this thing," but like their word isn't law. Like,
oh sure,
even if they're part of the PowerShell team, like they have like committee meetings for this reason. Some things are a little controversial, and if you're like, "I don't think that's quite right," just say so. They'll be happy to flag it for like a follow-up review with like the whole team, and they can like hash it out themselves and be like, "Okay, this is what we think should actually happen." And there are even times when like someone's like, "Hey, but did you consider this?" And they're like, "Oh, we actually didn't." They'll have another meeting, and then like, "Oh, you were right, great, awesome." And so like, don't be afraid to like push back a little bit if you really think like there's something to be gained there, for sure. I mean, like, don't be like awful about it, but you know, like be civil and everything, be a decent human being, of course. But like, yeah, they're very great with just like, you know, collaborating with people on there. And I mean, they'll have their own like day jobs where they do a lot of the nitty gritty stuff, but a lot of the stuff that like people want to happen just ends up being low priority. So if you want to go ahead and implement it, a lot of the time they'll be like, "Okay, great, we need to fix this up. Can you add some tests in? Great, we'll merge it, and now it's a feature." Like, it's a lot of it just doesn't happen because they don't have time, because they're a tiny team. So if you have the spare time, you want to learn a bit, go for it. It's great fun, and it helps everyone out because it just improves the tools everyone uses. So yeah.
So how often do you push your projects to the PowerShell gallery? Because when I was playing with PS Cohen's, I installed it from the gallery, and there were a couple things that I wanted to fix, and then I went to GitHub to look at it, and I was like, "Okay, well, somebody fixed that already."
PS Cohen's has been sitting there a little bit. I do need to push a new release. So I don't always push like on like a time basis. It's usually like I kind of have a vague map in my head of like, I have these features I want to do that I feel would like be like worthwhile just put together, and like that's roughly enough for like the next version or whatever. I don't like to say like every 3 months I'm going to do it, because I mightn't have time in like that 3 months to really do it. So
sure,
it'll be like, there's this set of features that I want to do, and that's kind of where I like draw the line and be like, "Okay, there we go, there's the next version," type thing. So something that I haven't had time to get to yet, but yeah, no, I do need to get back to PS Koans a bit and polish it up a little more. There's a couple more things I want to add there, and then get a new release out for sure. Yeah.
And then I'm sure when all the pieces are in there for the SQL or DBA tools, or I forget what that project's called, SQL tools, are ready. I'm sure that'll be another iteration, another version that'll get pushed out.
Absolutely, yeah. So currently in my head, I have that plan because it's a separate module and not everyone's going to have it. I have actually been talking to Shane, and he's basically implementing this in Pestra's mock interface. So you don't technically need to have the module installed to do the koans for it. But if you want to do anything more than basically what the lesson's going to have, you're going to need the module, and you're probably going to need something to tinker with on your own as well, because it would be expensive in terms of like resources to have the PS Koans module like spin up its own SQL servers and stuff like that. That might be a little more than what most people want. So it's probably going to be mostly in like the commands are going to be more. They're not going to be live, but they'll have enough data in them from the like that's actually pulled from like an existing SQL instance that's like sanitized and like messed with, so it works with the format, etc. But it'll be like as you would get from like a similar SQL server, and it'll be packaged up on a separate sort of track, I guess I could say, to the main body of PS Core. So currently, literally everything is just like lumped into the same thing. There are different folders for like subcategories and stuff, but there's no like, and you can actually select like specific lessons to target as well if you just want to jump around a bit. But there's no like distinct sections yet. What I'm planning to do is I'm going to have like the main body, which is just like core PowerShell stuff. This is like what everyone gets basically. And then if you want to learn a module, there'll be like an extra command you run that just adds those into your profile folder where it keeps the lessons you're currently working on. So they'll get added into your like mix of lessons, and it'll go through them probably after like, you know, the base module is like more or less complete, or you can just target that module specifically if you just want to work on like DBA tools or whatever. Nice. So it'll like start out as a different folder in the module, but when you're actually working on it, it'll just turn up like another category in like your profile folder where all the scripts lessons you're working on are, because it keeps like its own like what's the word, like clean copy of the lessons in the module folder, and then when you're actually working on them, it just copies them to like your profile on the computer or whatever. So it'll do a similar thing, and then it'll just toss in this extra folder from like a subfolder somewhere. So that's kind of the plan for that. So it'll be separate, but you can just toss it in whenever you need it, basically. Yeah, that's very cool. That's a neat way, because not everybody's going to want to go through the DBA tools pieces or the Active Directory pieces. I think it's valuable for everyone, whatever. But yeah, like not everyone's gonna want to track through that sometimes, for sure. Yeah. Or maybe they'll note that it's there and come back to it when they need to learn. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That kind of thing makes total sense to me. So we had a question in the chat room. Are you tinkering anything else or with anything else outside of PowerShell? Not heavily at the moment. Like there's a couple very small side projects that are probably not really going to see the light of day, but they're mostly just for fun, really. Okay. Well, I do have one more question I want to ask you, and this is the question we ask all of our first-time guests, which you may or may not be aware of. But the question is, what was your first computer? My first computer was... My first computer was not my oldest computer, but my first computer was, it was a very basic, like, so when I was a kid, it's a little bit of backstory. When I was a kid, my mother was like, very like resistant to the idea of like having a home computer of any kind. Like it was like, no, you don't need that. You're a kid, go play, whatever, you know? So we didn't really have a computer until I was like 10 or something like that, give or take a year or two. I can't remember. And then when we did, it was just like I think the first one we got was Windows 98 or something. And even that was a couple years old by then. So it was an old like box. It was pretty slow. It was Windows 98. It worked kind of mostly. And at that point in Australia, we still basically almost everywhere just had dial-up, so we were a little behind. Yeah. Australia is still pretty behind on that. Like there have been like a good handful of attempts to actually have like a national like broadband network, but implementations have varied wildly and mostly flopped completely. Just never got finished. It's been a total mess. But thankfully, most people aren't consistently on dial-up anymore, which is great because dial-up is terrible. Never again. But yeah, no. So we had like Windows 98 and dial-up modem for a good couple of years, and then like after that, I think like wireless broadband became the thing because like no one wanted to pay for the telecom companies to actually run wires, and the companies didn't want to fork out to run wires and wanted the government to subsidize it. It was all politics and crap. But so yeah, that was the first computer I had. It was it was old, probably half rusted on the inside. Who knows? But it was cheap, and it kept us quiet for a while, which was basically all my mother needed of it, essentially. A couple of years after that, though, I actually we went through a few other computers that were newer, etc. And then somewhere along the line, I stumbled upon like a really, really old Windows 3.1 laptop, and I was like, "This is great! It's Windows 3.1." I don't know why I wanted that thing, but I did. It was like someone was selling it like real cheap, like a garage sale, and I tinkered with that old thing for a while, and then I think at some point I was just messing around with it, and I ended up erasing the hard disk.
Oh,
and that was it. And I didn't have any like backup thing for Windows 3.1, so that was it. It was just dead. I was like, great. But yeah.
Well, very cool.
Yeah.
So where can people find your work other than GitHub? What's your Twitter ID? Where can they find you on?
Twitter is at Vex32, 2 X's for reasons that date back a long time. And GitHub's already been linked, I'm sure, somewhere along the line there, a couple times. So that's all there. I'm on Reddit as Tallow with, it's like TA and then like 2 1s and then OW. So that's me on Reddit. If you see me on Reddit occasionally, I'm there. I'm on Slack, of course. I'm just Joel on there. If you see pink flowers in the Slack or the Discord, that's probably me. Because that's part of my username, and then I have a GitHub Pages website as well. So there's a few rather too in-depth but interesting enough blog posts on there about various PowerShell things. So I'll put a link in there as well.
Okay, perfect.
So I think that's what it is. Let me just double check because it's been a while since I had to type it out. Where is it? That's the one, right? Nope. There it is. Yeah, that's right. It doesn't end up in com. They ended IO for pages things. That's right. There it is. But yeah, I actually posted one. I think just today. Actually, I was messing around with Replace and found something that no one seemed to know about. So I was like, I'm gonna make a post on that. And a lot of them are like that too. So I've just got like various things that I stumbled across or that I was just tinkering with, and was like, this would be useful if I like wrote up a thing on it. So I did. There's a fair few there, and I'll post more from time to time, I guess. But yeah,
excellent.
That's where you find me.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, and
thanks for having me.
Thank you for your contributions to the community. It's so cool. It's very exciting. I've been having fun with going through those little cones or coens or however you're supposed to say it.
Ask Google. Google knows the pronunciation. I don't. So, but yeah, no, yeah, it's. I'm glad you're enjoying it for sure. And obviously, any comments, any things you need to think be changed, just drop an issue on the GitHub or PR, whatever you want to do.
Are you going to be at the summit, or are you speaking anywhere?
I am not. No.
Okay.
Fortunately, not. No. I think I have one other. I can't remember where it is. Mike, was it Mike? I think it's in my calendar. I don't know, but May 1st, I'll be speaking at one of the PowerShell user groups remotely. But yeah, we'll be doing a bit of a thing with PS Coans there, a bit of an interactive thing, so it should be fun.
Oh, cool. Do you remember what group it is?
I would have to go back and check. Give me 1 sec. I will dig through my messages and things. Is it?
The Raleigh Power?
Might be. I'm just trying to remember exactly. Nope, that's not it. It probably is. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's here somewhere. Yeah, I don't know. It's too late in the day. I can't remember anymore, but
okay.
But I'll be there.
If I find it, I'll put it in the show notes.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too, man. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody in the chat room and on following us on YouTube for joining us. And Hal kind of forgot about us, but hopefully he will be joining us next time. And have a good night, everybody, or depending on what time zone you're in.